Hello, and welcome to Morgan Meets the Eye. My name is Evan Morgan, and I am the host of this series. Race is considered something of a sensitive subject in our society, yet it is a matter that economists are repeatedly confronted with. My guest for this episode is Germinal G. Van, a West African member of the Mises Institute, who has tackled these issues, among many others, in his work. This is episode 18 of Morgan Meets the Eye, in which Van and I discuss the economics of Africa, of Black America, and the macroeconomics that impact our modern society. Hello, Germinal Van. Thanks for joining the show. Before we go any further, though, where should my listeners go to check out your work?
Yes. So first, thanks for having me on your platform. It's a true honor. Everyone can check my work on Amazon and the website of my publishing company, ggvpublishingcompany.com. And I also own a online newspaper called the Lake Street Review. So this is a media company. So for anyone who wants to read the daily articles, they can read that. They focus on economics, financial markets, business, and politics between the United States and Africa. So that company specifically focus on incentivizing American readers who are interested in investing in emerging markets. So what we do is we give information about the macroeconomic conditions of the African continent, wherever it is. It could be in Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa. We basically give the macroeconomic conditions, and based on what's going on there now, investors can decide whether they want to go further or not. But that's pretty much what we do at the Lake Street Review.
So I figured it would be good for us to start by basically discussing your background in this case. I do know that you grew up in West Africa, and you didn't immigrate to the United States until after high school. So as a result of this, I suspect that you would have a perspective that's almost unique among members of the Mises Institute. I know that your experiences in West Africa have influenced your research as well as a lot of the topics you've written about. And, in my case, my personal knowledge of Africa's economics is built upon, the articles and journals that I've read from personally. But naturally, I only know it from a distance, from a second or perhaps even a third-hand perspective. But for you personally, I'm just curious, what was your standard of living, growing up in the late 20th and early 21st century? And, pardon my blunt phrasing of this, but, Westerners do tend to view Africa as a deeply impoverished continent.
It's true. It's true. Don't apologize. I mean, that's a reality. It's not just West Africa, but the whole African continent. We as a continent, unfortunately, are lagging socioeconomically. So to answer your question, what was my standard of living? That's a very good question. So I was not born poor. Let me put it that way. I come from a family of educated people. My father and my mom both have law degrees. My dad worked as a prosecutor for the Rwanda genocide for 18 years. My mom is the senior vice president of legislative affairs at the National Assembly, so the parliament in Ivory Coast. I've been to private school my whole life, so I can tell you that I was not born poor. But in Africa, usually, and this here I speak for most of the continent, the middle class is something that did not really exist until recently. Now they're building a middle class, but Africa is lagging considerably behind, and I'm going to explain why. So we tend to associate Africa's economic lag to colonialism. It's because of white people. We are behind. We can't move forward, and so on and so forth. There is some truth in that, but the magnitude is not considerable. That's where it's important, because Africa was colonized by the Brits, the French, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Dutch, and so on and so forth. When you look at countries that were colonized by the Brits, generally speaking, they're more advanced than the French. Because the Brits, they have a decentralized system where they give political power to local chief to, to govern their subjects. They say, okay, we don't want to impose directly our will, but we will delegate you power and then you will do the work for us. Because the Brits, the Brits, they always approached things from a transactional financial standpoint. So the relationship that the British created with their colonies was a commercial relationship. Compared to the French, they tried to transform the African man into a French person. The Brits were never interested in transforming the African man into a British person. The Brits, they say, okay, you have your culture, that's you, do what you want, so long as our transaction or our agreement benefits both of us. That's why you see, for example, the United States, you have people coming from all over the place, and then they coexist here. When you come in the United States, we don't say forsake your culture. No, people celebrate their heritage and they live here, but they submit to the laws of the United States of America.
Right, a melting pot, essentially.
Exactly. So that is the British approach. British, they never say forsake your culture. Keep your culture, but submit to the laws of the monarchy when it comes to economic and political matters. But the French, they want you to completely forsake your culture, to be a French person. And that's why colonialism in that part has played an important role in keeping former French colonies stagnating. Because French people have a very paternalistic approach to society. And if you look at French culture, they heavily believe in the state. They love it's funny. I can rant about the French for a long time, because when you, for example, look at every election in France, when you look at the key issues on what they want, on why they need a new president, they talk about le pouvoir d'achat, basically the purchasing power. They say, oh, we have high salary, high gross wages, but the net wage is low. Well, why is it low? Because you want government to give you social assistance. That's why it's low. It's not for free. And every year they complain, or every election cycle they complain. I'm like, you guys are stupid. I'm sorry, but the private sector does not determine your net wage. It only determines your gross wage. You get a job, you negotiate with your boss how much you want to be paid based on the experience and based on the skill you acquired in your work experience. Once you guys agree, you sign the employment contract. Now, based on how much you get paid, the state will tax you. So if there's one person to complain to, it's the state. But French people refuse to reduce government size to have higher net wages. Anyways, I digress, but that is the French way. But to come back to Africa, that's where I was talking about the impact of colonialism. So colonialism played an important role for French-speaking countries, not for the whole continent. But the reason why Africa is lagging is because we rely on rentier economics. I don't know if you heard that word, but rentier economics is basically the economic system of rent. Basically, it lies on three tenets. The first is the country's income relies on a external source, usually a commodity. It could be oil, gas, cocoa, coffee, basically agricultural products or minerals. The second is that such a system does not rely on the productive capacity of its citizens or residents. And the third tenet is that the primary beneficiary of such a system is the government. Do you follow?
Very, very bad trifecta there.
Right. That's and that's why. So in Africa, in most African countries, and this is whether they speak French or English, and this is pretty much for the whole continent, we export a lot of our commodities as raw materials. We do not transform them before exporting them to the global market. And because we do not transform them, therefore we exporting them at a lower price. Because the commodity in itself doesn't have any value unless it is transformed and used for alternative purposes. For example, lithium. If you give an African lithium and iron, what is the difference? The guy doesn't know. He doesn't know. But lithium in itself is just a piece of rock. It doesn't have any value until you actually transform it, and then you use it to put that into like iPhones or Samsung or to create gadgets. That's when it becomes valuable. But Africa heavily relies on rentier economics because it benefits the political class, the government. The government is always the first beneficiary, the first one to receive whatever revenue the country makes. It's the first to receive the money, and then if they want to be nice, they can distribute it to the rest of the population. That's why I don't know if you saw, for example, what happened in Gabon with the Bongo family. The Bongo family is reputed to be billionaires, but where did they get that money? Gabon is an oil-rich country. It exports a lot of oil, but what kind of oil do they export? Crude oil. No one is using crude oil except corporations, right?
Right.
So the money they get from the crude oil, they keep that from themselves, and the rest of the population is poor. That's why the wealth inequality you see in Africa is massive. And it's not inequality between the merchant class. When I say the merchant class, I mean the entrepreneurial class, because entrepreneurs are merchants. It's not between the merchant class and the working class, it's between the political class and everyone else. Africa is the only place where you see politicians being millionaires and billionaires because of rentier economics.
Yes, very astutely said there. Basically that, even though there are, when I look at Africa, I see a lot of untapped potential. For example, I see, I see a continent that has the potential to be a wealthy nation. They are rich in, natural resources, but like you're saying, they are exporting these in their most raw form. I know that Africa is very rich in, minerals, oil, things like that. But like you're saying, they're only exporting it through the forms of crude oil. And by going to what you were saying about the political class, I do think it is fruitful to ask why it is that Africa is in this particular economic position. And, there have been plenty of theories that have been laid out about this, from imperialism to war to racism, and somehow to capitalism and the free market as a cause of this poverty. And I've noticed that it seems that a lot of these accusations have been made without any real effort made to flesh them out. And we can point to examples of just disastrous leadership in a lot of these African countries, such as Idi Amin in Uganda and Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. In fact, I know in Idi Amin's case, for example, he actually established an economic crimes tribunal back in the mid-1970s that would outright punish, its own citizens for acting against the economic interests of the Ugandan government. Citizens would be executed in a lot of cases, or they'd be imprisoned for 10 years or above for selling goods at prices that did not align with the government's price controls. But, my overall point in mentioning this is that we can point to, terrible policies in certain nations, but, Africa is naturally an entire continent. So beyond, rentier economics, like you were saying, rentier economics, what case would you make for the economic plight across the African continent historically, going back centuries? What exactly would you attribute this to? Do you think what role do you think imperialism or war or any of these other, claims that are made, what significance do you think they have in this economic predicament?
Yeah, I mean, I stick to my argument around economics, because if African countries were able to transform the commodities that they're exporting, you will see that we will have a very strong domestic private sector. The difference between advanced countries and poor countries is that advanced countries have a strong domestic. That's all. That's literally what it is. That's literally what it is. What made the United States the greatest country in the world, economically speaking, is because the United States started transforming industrializing its economy. If you do not industrialize your economy, it doesn't matter. Yes, we have all the natural resources we want. If we even know that we have those natural resources because white people are the ones who discovered that. Those natural resources have been there for thousands of years. Africans didn't know. Okay? When white people come and say, oh yeah, you have uranium in Niger. Nigerians have been there, they didn't know they have uranium. When they come and say, oh, you have oil in Nigeria, Nigerians didn't know they had oil until white people went and explored the Nigerian ground and found oil. So the point is to say that Africa, so long as we will, whether it's capitalism or socialism, until we transform, until we process our commodities into finished products before selling them on the global market, we will be poor. That's the rule, because there are some African countries that have embraced capitalism too. Don't get me wrong. The country I'm from, Ivory Coast, it has embraced capitalism. It was, in fact, among the most economically advanced countries in the 1960s and 70s, because all the countries around Ivory Coast, so Mali, Burkina Faso, Ghana, at the time of Kwame Nkrumah, Liberia, all of them, they were pretty much socialist. Ivory Coast is the country that went for capitalism. So when you look at the income per capita of Ivory Coast in the 1960s and 70s compared to the income per capita of Mali and Burkina Faso and all these countries, we had higher income per capita. Nevertheless, we still relied on rentier economics, right? It's just that, thank God, the economic system we had did not try to control prices or, try to impose like socialist policies, but we still relied on rentier economics. So rentier economics is a true poison for the continent, because until we create factories that will transform, that will process raw commodities into finished consumable products, we will be poor. Because when we're able to industrialize the country, that's when we will create more jobs. We will create local champions, so local entrepreneurs that take economic matters in their hands. That's why we will create a true domestic and productive sector. Until then, whether we have capitalism or socialism, it doesn't matter. Because, for example, ask any person who likes Gaddafi. They will say, oh, Gaddafi was a great leader. Under his leadership, the income per capita of Libyans was almost as high as that of the United States. That is true. But why? It's not because Gaddafi had great policies. It's because at the time, the price of oil was high. That's all. Because Libya relied on oil, crude oil. The Libyans did not refine oil. They were selling crude oil the way it was. The same thing happened in Venezuela with Hugo Chavez. When Chavez took power at first, the living standard of Venezuelans was pretty high because the price of oil was high. That's all. But then when the price of oil tanked, the entire economy collapsed. This is not a way to lead a country. This is not a way to develop a country. You cannot let your country, you cannot let your society depend on an asset you do not control. In the United States, in advanced countries, they're advanced because they create businesses. A business is an asset you control, right? Even let's take, for example, hedge fund managers. A hedge fund focuses on financial markets. Most hedge fund managers invest in stocks. Nevertheless, stocks are assets you don't control. At the end of the day, you put your money, you hope that, well, they will reach the moon. But the hedge fund itself is a business that the hedge fund manager, who is the founder of the business, controls. That's why you have someone like Ken Griffin, who is a billionaire. Ken Griffin would have never been a billionaire if he just put directly his money into the stock market. He became a billionaire because he owns a hedge fund, which is a business he has full control over, so he can make decisions on how to make their investments because he has full control over that. So having a business enables you to have full control over the asset that you created for yourself. And that's why advanced countries are advanced, because they create businesses. But in African countries, in Latin American countries, they prevent people from creating businesses. And that's where now the difference between socialism and capitalism comes into play. Because most African countries went for socialism. So therefore, they abolish or reduce access to property. They don't want people to create businesses. Whereas countries that went for capitalism created businesses. So because they created businesses, they were able to increase productivity, they were able to increase output, and that improved the living standard of society in general.
So in that case, would you attribute, a lot of Africa's current economic situation to perhaps a shortage of labor, or perhaps a misallocation of that labor in some case?
I would say misallocation of labor, because the reason I say misallocation is because the African continent has talent, but because it lacks the infrastructure, most of the talent goes study abroad and doesn't come back. So that's a misallocation here, because those who went to study abroad and acquired the knowledge, they could go back and use their knowledge to develop the continent. But they stay here because they say, hey, those guys, they're corrupt, you will try, there's no opportunity, there are no opportunities anyways. What's the point? I'd rather stay here where there are more opportunities. And that's true. And that has been, for example, my case. I remember at first, I wanted to go back. So the initial reason why I came to the United States was to study politics and then go back and then do politics back home. That was when I used to think that politics was the solution to improve a nation's welfare. But then when I became accustomed to economics, I realized that politics is not the way to improve a nation's welfare. The way to improve a nation's welfare is free market, entrepreneurship. Let people create businesses, because when they create businesses, they understand the value of what they own, so they will take care of it and try to do a better job. So when I realized that, I changed my mind, and I was like, there is no point. So I'm one of those people who unfortunately came and did not go back, because I personally lost faith in the advancement of the continent. Because African societies are structured as a top-down society. We expect those at the top to lead and to create opportunities for those who are down, right, the general population. But when those at the top refuse to make themselves accountable, and this is one other issue besides rentier economics, one other issue is that the rule of law is not instilled in African culture. That's one of the issues. We don't put the laws above people. We put people above the law. So it creates a very uneven distribution of justice. If you're born into a poor family, well, yes, you're going to go to jail if you commit a crime. But if you're born into a rich family, you can buy off the judges, you can buy off the police, you can buy off the detective, the military, whatever. But here in the United States, don't get me wrong, it's not perfect too. Like, people who are very wealthy, they still get their ways around justice. But at least they pretend, because they try to follow the judicial process. They're trying to bring the person through the judicial process, right? Like, you arrest the guy, you perhaps put him, he goes before the judge makes bail. If he has the money to make bail, well, he's not going to go to jail, right? He's going to stay home until Judgment Day. He goes, takes his trial, and even if he takes a trial and is found guilty, the judge can send him to a federal prison or to a state prison, or the judge say, "House, you're going to be in prison in your own home." That depends on the discretion of the judge. But the point is to say that at least in the United States, what they do is to put even the rich through the judicial process. While in Africa, it's not even like that. So and because here in the United States, we respect the rule of law. Whereas there, the rule of law is not inculcated in people's culture or in people's personality.
Right. The government corruption has essentially completely disincentivized,
Yeah.
any effort made to, improve its position.
Yeah.
And I was reading, lately some reports from the World Bank, and I do know that they have a more optimistic, view of Africa. They've been citing some positive trends in terms of GDP output, but I'm personally pretty skeptical about this. I mean, Africa has a significantly higher inflation rate than any other country in the world. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's precariously close to 20% at this point. And furthermore, I place little to no value on the World Bank to begin with. I mean, it is a government organization with a very Keynesian bias. I mean, in fact, it was actually founded by John Maynard Keynes himself, to be exact. And so, what I'm kind of curious about is, under these current circumstances in Africa, what is your prognosis for Africa in the coming years? Do you think that the inflation rate will only get worse? Do you think GDP will fall? What is your prognosis? What your prediction, really?
So, first, I agree with you that the World Bank, the very they lean very Keynesian. So, I want to touch, in fact, on Keynesian economics a little bit. Keynesian economics does, and those financial institutions that they all use Keynesian economics to make economic predictions, they do economics the wrong way. You don't increase economic growth by propping up demand. You increase economic growth by propping up supply. As Adam Smith explained, the wealth of a nation is based on the expansion of economic production. An economy grows when there is an increase in the quantity of goods and services produced.
Not money.
Thank you. Not in the price. Because when you prop up demand, what you do is increasing the price, increasing the cost of things. Increasing the price or the cost of things does not increase the quantity nor the quality of the things being produced. So Keynesians, they talk about, GDP, it's increasing, because the way they see is that if you increase demand, quantity will increase subsequently because demand has increased. But that's not true. And that's why we have inflation all the time. Because African government, they try to prop up demand by printing more money and put that money into people's hands to stimulate consumption. But production doesn't follow. And that's why you have inflation above 20% in most African countries. In developed country, inflation, even when it's high, it's like 9, 10% at most. But in emerging markets, that thing goes to like 40, 50%. Yeah, right? Because they prop up demand too much while they don't stimulate supply. You have to stimulate supply. An economy grows when there are more goods and services than money in the economy. Because when there are more goods and services, that means that people now have the choice to buy as much as they want for the same price. That's the beauty. In other words, deflation is a good thing. Maybe deflation going for too long may be bad, because if prices keep falling for years and years, at the end of the day, the business has to go bankrupt. Because first, if price reach zero, that means what? You're selling goods and services for free. Or if they go negative, that means that now you're the one owing customers or consumers.
Right, they're selling at a loss, yes.
Right, yeah, exactly. You're going at a loss, and that doesn't make sense, because you can't pay your labor, people who are working for you. You cannot maintain the infrastructure and so on and so forth. So it doesn't make sense. So deflation going on forever doesn't make sense. But deflation, in general, it's a good thing, because it lowers the price of goods and services. People can afford more, that they have a higher living standard, and it stabilizes prices. It leaves the stabilization of prices to market forces. And that's one thing that I think it's nonsense, is when people think that central banks is the role of central bank to stabilize price. It's not the role of central bank to stabilize price. Price is stabilized by buyers or sellers, consumers and producers bargaining. When they bargain, that's when you have volatility. Once they reach a consensus on what the right price should be, Now prices take a trajectory. They take either an upward trajectory or they take a downward trajectory. When prices stabilize by taking an upward trajectory, it means that prices are increasing. Why? Because people are willing to pay for things that are more expensive. Why? Because they believe that they believe that the value they will derive from the goods and services they're purchasing is worth more than the price at which they're paying. That's why, for example, Apple. Every year, Apple release a product. So every year, Apple products become more expensive. But we still go to the Apple store sometimes, make a long line in the cold to get into the store and buy the Apple products we want. Why? Because we believe that the value we will derive from using those products is higher than what we're willing to pay for. And then when prices take a downward trajectory, it means that consumers are not satisfied with the product being sold on the market.
Right. And ironically, the Apple products you're referring to could almost be considered a depreciating asset since they continually new ones and the existing ones become increasingly obsolete.
Exactly.
Their value seems to fall.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact is that we know that. But because value is subjective, people buy this phone, for example, for different reasons. Some people rather buy the phone strictly for the pictures because people love photography and they can start their photography business just by using an iPhone. For others, they buy an iPhone because they want to do Uber, so they use it for the GPS. So people buy the same product for different reasons. And because of that, the product is expensive because the value they derive from the utility is higher than the cost. That's what it is. So it's not the role of central banks to try to stabilize prices. And yet, that's what some central banks do around the world, specifically in African countries. That's why, again, you see inflation going above 20%. It doesn't make sense when inflation is double digits. It doesn't make sense. So where do I see Africa's going? Honestly, I think Africa will develop. The question is going to be developed by who? Because you see people or communities like the Lebanese who come to Africa and they get richer than Africans themselves. There's a strong Lebanese community, for example, in Ivory Coast. And the funny thing is that those Lebanese, when they come, they're not bringing innovative ideas. They're already selling what exists. You see a Lebanese, for example, opening up a shawarma restaurant. Shawarma exists for a long time. Or he will open like a mattress business. He didn't create the mattress. He just opened a business. A mattress is an existing good. It's not like Steve Jobs creating an iPhone, which is innovative because an iPhone did not exist before, right? And yet Lebanese get super rich over that because one issue is that many Africans, they love also using the victim card, like, oh, well, we don't go anywhere in life because of colonialism, because of racism, because they're preventing us, we don't have opportunities. But you have Lebanese, honestly, Lebanon is a failed state. You have Lebanese coming to your land and they get richer than you in your own land. Come on, man. What are you doing? So it's, to me, like it's a matter also of personal responsibility. I think it's time to own up. Be like, yes, we were colonized. Yes, we did not have opportunities back then. But this cannot be used over and over to justify why we're still poor. We're still poor because we rely on this frontier economics. We're still poor because we don't engage in entrepreneurial venture enough.
On that note of, owning up and taking responsibility and, escaping prolonged poverty, I think it would be a good idea to essentially trace a line from the Africans to the African Americans, actually, that is to say, Black America. And I know that you've written extensively on the rut, for lack of a better word, that much of the Black community finds itself stuck within. And the typical explanation for this is that Black people in America are unable to escape poverty due to the lasting effects of slavery or some kind of nebulous and, in many cases, quite frankly, ill-defined systemic racism. And this is a challenging idea to argue against because its proponents will often appeal to their lived experience when somebody provides evidence contrary to, the victimhood mentality that pervades much of the Black community. So then, Germinal, what case do you make then for the long-term, widespread generational poverty of Black Americans in the United States?
Well, victimhood in America is a profitable business. Why would you, pardon my French, but bust your ass off to try to make money when you can get money from the government from saying that you're oppressed? That's all it is. Because Black people know, like, to me, the United States is the only country on the planet where dark skin can become a billionaire. Where have you seen dark skin becoming? Maybe South Africa. South Africa is the other country. But the United States is the country on planet Earth where you see a lot of Black skin billionaires. If this country was so racist as they claim it is, you would never even be a millionaire to start with. When slavery was a legal institution back then, there were still some Black people that were millionaires, despite the fact that slavery was still a legal institution. How that happened? And because if we start from that fact, because it's a fact, if we start from that fact, who were the people who made those Black people rich during slavery? They were whites. Because white people were the one who had the purchasing power. Black people at the time when there was slavery, they couldn't do anything, right? Who were the customers of those Black merchants? White people. Why? Because the dollar doesn't know color. White people come and buy from those Black merchants. They tell their friends about it. Hey, there's this Negro. Sorry for my language, but that's how they used to call Black people back then. There's this Negro who sells very good stuff. You should go and try it. So they go, they try it, and then they tell their friends and so on, and word of mouth, and that's how demand grows. Demand grows means more revenue for you, the merchant. That's all. So the point is to say that capitalism enabled already the liberalization of the Black community for Black people to prosper. But it is profitable for most Black people to cry victimhood so that they won't have to do the work in order to become rich. And honestly, even here's the thing. The difference, we love to talk about the wealth gap, the racial wealth gap, how to close the racial wealth gap. Black people were deprived of opportunities for so long and so on and so forth. The wealth gap is based on information and how you capitalize on information. That's all. I always give this example. Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos is literally my favorite entrepreneur. People have their views on him. That's fine. I love Jeff Bezos because Jeff Bezos improved my life. Thanks to him, I became an author. He created a platform for people to self-publish books, to literally start their own businesses. So Jeff Bezos is a great guy. So anyone who doesn't like him, they can, I don't want to be rude, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
Jeff Bezos, right, when he was working for D.E. Shaw, I'm sure you heard of D.E. Shaw, a very big hedge fund. He was living his life. He made good money. He was even vice president of the company at age 30 or age 31. So technically, he was making good money. And one day, he stumbled on the information that he can get a return on investment of 2,300% with the internet. That is the information. that changed the entire thing. Jeff Bezos had two choices when he stumbled on that information. The first choice could have been, oh, cool, okay, and move on with his day. Never had to worry about it again. The second choice was, how can I actually generate such a return with the internet? That's all. So Jeff Bezos became a billionaire not because he was born into a rich family with a silver spoon in his mouth. No. He became a billionaire because he capitalized on a piece of information he came across. Most of the billionaires we see in the United States are billionaires because they're all business owners, not because they were born into rich families.
That's right.
And even being born into a rich family does not guarantee that you will stay rich. It only gives you an advantage. That's all. It gives you a leg up. That's all it does. Even when they give you that leg up, you still have to do the work to maintain the wealth that your family has created. Because if you don't do the work to maintain the value, it's going to plummet. Look at the Vanderbilts. Cornelius Vanderbilt created a dynasty that unfortunately went into ruins because the generations that came after him were not able to maintain the wealth that he created. So again, there is no guarantee, because in this country, people associate white with wealth and black with poverty. That is the social correlation that American society created. So from the black people perspective, when you're a white person and you're wealthy, we assume automatically that life was easy for you, that you didn't have to do much. And that's not true. That is not true. I can even give you a guy like Diddy. Diddy is right now into really serious trouble. But how Diddy became rich? Diddy, first of all, was a horrible rapper. Let's be honest. Diddy is a horrible rapper. But how Diddy became rich? He created his label, Bad Boy Entertainment. He knew that he was not that good of a rapper, but he decided to sign talented rappers to his label. Whatever song that they play that make a hit on the Billboard, his company reaps the profit, and then the artists that he signed, they need to sell a certain amount of songs in order to get paid the royalties. For example, who would say you need to be selling, I don't know, 500 or 1,000 songs to touch, let's say, 10% royalties and so on and so forth. So until the artists reach those 1,000 songs sold, Bad Boy Entertainment makes the money. That's how Diddy became rich. And Diddy is black. Diddy is not an Indian American. He's not Asian American. He's not white. He's black. He's a billionaire. Maybe he may not be a billionaire soon because of everything he's going through right now. But he's a very wealthy man. So it's all... Yeah, go on.
It's funny that you bring that case up, because I often think about how, deeply superficial the anti-capitalist, anti-free market mentality is, where people will often criticize, these businessmen who have become wealthy and successful, but then we'll have no problem, celebrating all of these musical artists, that are just as wealthy and have become just as successful. But for some reason, in that particular case, it's permissible to them simply because it happens to be in the field of music, whereas, I don't really see why that is particularly relevant to the overall case.
Yeah, right. But but the point is to say that did he capitalize on information? The information was like, you can make money in the music industry by creating your own label. When he stumbled on that information, he said, oh, cool, well, I think about it and never have to worry about it. Or how can I actually create my own label to become rich in the music industry? It's information. And today, especially in this day and age, it's so easy to capitalize on the information we have. So to me, the wealth gap is a matter of how you use the information available to you. That's all. And I've always said this, right? Black people are very intelligent people. The problem with Black people is that they're very distracted. What I mean by distracted, Black people focus a lot on things that do not pertain toward human advancement. When you look at white people, they always engage in intellectual activities, anything that requires inquiry. And, there are many studies that have been done saying, white people have a higher IQ than Black people, therefore white people are more intelligent. I don't believe that's true. Let me explain why I'm saying this. I believe that we're all human beings. As human beings, we all have the ability to think and to rationalize. That is why we're above animals. That is a fact. What IQ reflects, it's your analytical intelligence, not your overall intelligence. Black people are very street smart. They have a strong practical intelligence. That's what street smart is. Because Black people, if there was one thing Black people are extremely good at, is their ability to survive and to adapt, because they had no choice. You can bring a Black person anywhere on planet Earth, he will adapt, he will survive, he will even speak the language of wherever he is better than the local people of that language. That's Black people. They had that strength. But now the problem is that they don't use their strength to strengthen their community in terms of intellectual advancement. Look at Jewish people, for example. Jewish people they don't have like a super brain or anything. But the reason why we believe that Jewish people are smart is because Jewish people engage into intellectual activities. That's all. If you expose your brain to intellectual activities, your IQ will increase. You read more, you learn more stuff, therefore you become more intelligent. But if you expose your brain to things that don't make you smarter, you either stagnate at best or you become dumb at worst. That's what it is. And that's the real difference between white people and Black people. White people, they actually, when they use their what they know to create something that will actually pertain toward human advancement. Black people, they don't use that, although they could, because they're human beings. They have a brain, they have reason, they have logic, but they don't use it. They don't use the information available to them to pertain toward the advancement of the Black community. I strongly believe that's the real reason. Because we're all human beings. Don't get me wrong. Genetics play a role in intelligence too. If you're born from intelligent parents, yes, you have an advantage. Do not get me wrong. You have like an easier time to understand abstract concept, because that's what analytical intelligence is all about. Is can you understand abstract concept? But if you were born into a family that was not educated, but they understand that you need to go to school in order to acquire knowledge so that you can make a life for yourself, that already plays a difference. Because they know that, sure, themselves, they cannot understand abstract concept, abstract ideas, because they lack the education, but they're aware of the power of education in itself. So they want to make sure that you, as their child, you get that education that they couldn't get. So here they're practicing wisdom. Intelligence is wisdom. And analytical intelligence, IQ, is just a portion of global, of overall intelligence. It's not someone's actual or it's not someone's overall intelligence, just an aspect of his intelligence. So in my opinion, I think that Black people are too distracted. They focus on things that are not important. And one other thing is that Black people focus a ton, oh my God, a ton on the past. I don't know if do you know Dr. Umar?
Oh, yes.
Okay. When you hear Dr. Umar speaking, Dr. Umar never presents empirical evidence of everything he talks about. And that is because people assume that because something is logical, therefore it is true. It's not because something is logical that it is necessarily true. or let me rephrase this. They assume that because something is logical, therefore it is empirically true.
Not the same thing.
Yeah, not the same thing. That is even one of the issues I have with the Austrians as well, because although I subscribe myself to the Austrian traditions to some extent, I don't consider fully myself an Austrian because I disagree with praxeology, but this is something for another day. But I've always said that one of the reasons why is because something sounds logically, because something is logically sound, because something is logically true doesn't mean that it is empirically true. For example, if you say all elephants are pink, Dora is an elephant, therefore Dora is pink. That is logically true.
Right.
But does it mean that it's empirically true? Have you seen a pink elephant
No.
in your life? No. Right? So, but to come back to Dr. Umar, that's what Dr. Umar always talk about our ancestors and this and that. These are things that hold Black people back. Let me tell you about the role of history. Look at how white people and Black people approach history. White people always focus on the future. White people learn about history so that they can make better and informed decisions about the future. When Black people learn about history, all it does is that it fuels more resentment and strengthens the victimhood mentality. That's the issue, and that's why they're advocating for this nonsense of critical race theory. What good does it do to you? Yes, you learn about your past. It's important to learn about the past. I agree. But what do you do with the information you learn about it? You see, it comes again to information. What do you do with that information? White people, they learn about the past so that they can improve the future. Black people, they learn about the past so that they become more resentful.
Right.
It's
yes, I understand. Yes, I understand. I approach things almost from a stoic perspective where basically, we should focus on what is within our control. The past is not within our control, but it is within our control to at least learn from it and be educated from it and apply that going forward. So basically what you're saying brings me to a certain book, Thomas Sowell's work, Black Rednecks and White Liberals. Now, I would say that there are millions of Americans, and these could potentially be from any racial group, but primarily the Black population, that are being held back by a very negative and self-destructive culture, which is what you were touching upon there. Whereas rednecks are seen as the lower performing among whites, this same Southern culture hinders the Black population, but to an even greater extent, since a far greater proportion of Blacks were exposed to the South than whites historically. And this redneck culture is not even unique to America as well. I mean, this is something that goes back centuries. I mean, what we call white Southern redneck culture started in Britain, back in certain areas of the British Isles where the whites emigrated from. And this culture, manifests itself in behavior that reflects a very high time preference. And Thomas Sowell explains that this culture, which today lives on in the worst ghettos, allegedly has to be preserved, according to a lot of white liberals who see it as something that is inherent and intrinsic to Black culture. And quite honestly, I can't think of a worse insult or a greater act of condescension than that. But having laid out this problem, what do you propose as, the antidote, essentially, to this poverty that so much of Black America faces today? What action should be taken economically, and what economic policies should be reversed, for that matter, to correct this?
Sure. So, first of all, what Thomas Sowell talks about is technically hood culture. Hood culture is the culture of poverty. And poverty is all about making decisions for instant gratification. That's what poverty is about. When you look at the way hood people behave, it's all for now. They never project themselves in the next 5 years. It's all for now. It's attention. I want to do things today so that I can get praised. When hood people they act all tough, oh yeah, I've been with 20 women, and he thinks this is an accomplishment. Bro, you're collecting STDs. There's no accomplishment here. Or like, yo, I shot this guy in the street and he thinks he's tough. Bro, no, you're going to jail. And then once you go to jail, you're done. You can never be reinstated in society. Even if you do, no one will give you a loan to start off. You are literally cornering yourself. And they don't realize that. But to come back to your question of what policies could be reversed, first of all, we need to rip off the welfare state. Because the welfare state created a lot of single moms in the Black community. The Black community is the community that has the highest rate of children being born out of wedlock, which is not an accomplishment again. And because, government implement that policy, well, you can collect kids from men, and then you're going to collect money. So women now have no incentive to get married. While marriage is actually a great incentive to build wealth. Because first of all, you get tax deductions when you're married, like when you file for your taxes and stuff, you get more money on your tax return. Number two, being married enables you to create generational wealth. Black people love talking about generational wealth, but they don't do much about it to actually make it become a reality. I'm a strong guy. I'm a strong proponent of generational wealth. I own 2 companies, as you see, right? I own GGV Publishing. By the way, for any person who is interested to become an author, my company offers that opportunities to them. So we focus on first-time authors or like people who want to become authors. So, but my company, for example, I know that by creating this company, I'm creating generational wealth. I can pass that down to my kids. They have an asset to rely on. My media company is another asset I own. I'm creating generational wealth here. And that's how other cultures, whether it's whites, whether it's Asians or Indian Americans, they always project themselves in 30 years. Like, what are we going to leave to the next generations? So the economic policies to be undone are the welfare state. So stop giving money to women so that they can have illegitimate kids. Reduce the size of government by cutting a lot of those social programs so that people will actually be reliant on themselves rather than government assistance, because government assistance doesn't help. It only makes them poorer, because once they receive that check, they have not worked for, they have no incentive to go back in the job market or even start their own company. They're like, why should I go through that struggle if the government pays me $400 or $500 per month for me to spend on whatever the hell I want? Which is messed up, because you're taking money away from the guy who's waking up at 5 in the morning, commutes to go to the city to exchange his time and labor for a compensation. And that is very unfair. It's an unfair redistribution of wealth. And the people the poor who are receiving that money, they're not doing any good use with that money. That's what they're dependent on it. It's important to create laws that will incentivize people to become reliant on itself. But the problem is that it's not good business for government to do that. Because government is not driven by the profit motive, or the profit motive of government is to expand its electoral base. The more people are dependent on those social programs, the more voters they have. And the more they can increase government spending, therefore accumulate deficits, and therefore increase the national debt. That's the profit of government. That's how government is profitable. So it is not in the best interest to uplift people, to say people, go start your company, we believe in entrepreneurship and do this and do that. So
if anything, they do the exact opposite.
What is it?
If anything, they do the opposite. I mean, if anything, I would actually add to what you're saying, that I think it would be very good to actually deregulate a lot of these, the entrepreneurial fields. A lot of them are so heavily regulated that it provides a massive barrier to entry, provides protectionism to a lot of the more established businesses, and ultimately stifles competition as well. And I would say that can impact all races, across the board, in this case.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's that's what it is. So like, we need to implement supply side laws instead of demand side laws, because demand side laws are simply keeping people poor. Because every time government is implementing a law to quote unquote help people having access to home, access to this, access to that, what it does is that it actually increases the cost of living. Because when you artificially facilitate access to people, you increase the cost of living. Because there is demand increase, because you say everyone can have access to this. But again, supply does not follow. Look at student loans, why education became so expensive in the United States. A Harvard education back before 1971, was $2,000 a year. Now it's $80K a year. Why? Because of the government has subsidized student loans. You said, oh, well, everyone deserves an education. Everyone should go to college. Let's give those loans to everybody. So everybody applies. It increased demand. But what people don't realize is that giving those student loans to people is an asset on the government balance sheet. It's a liability on your balance sheet that you have to pay until you're clear. That's the issue. But what it does, it increased demand for education, therefore increase the cost of education, because universities cannot have everybody, even if they want to. And because they cannot have everybody, because of the laws of economics, supply and demand, scarcity, therefore they have to increase the price. And now that Biden is forgiving loans, universities are saying, well, we're going to increase the price more because we know that you're going to take loans and you're going to be forgiven. So what incentive do we have to reduce the price, the cost of tuition? Student loans does not address the cost of tuition. On the contrary, it increases the cost of tuition because you're granting people the ability, the access to have loans whenever they want. So you're worsening the cost of tuition. It's the same for housing. A house back in 1971 used to cost $25K. Today, that same house costs $430,000. And in the next 10, maybe 15 years, a single family home will cost $1 million. Because you're increasing people access to homes. Not that it's a bad thing, but the problem is that you're increasing access, which proper demand, supply again does not follow. So a house that didn't increase in size keeps increasing in value. And that value is not real, it's artificial value.
Exactly. I see on the left, I see a lot of these movements calling for, free college, free healthcare. I know it's only a matter of time until free housing, I think, becomes a particular thing they're calling for.
Oh, yeah.
But the issue with this is that I fully agree that these things in our society are very much overpriced, but their objective value is not $0. I don't think that these things should be free. I mean, if they were free, they would have a worth of $0. But basically, because this movement that calls for them to be free, and of course they're not actually free, they're funded by taxes and things like that. Because of that, the price that we're seeing is just not accurate. I mean, they're essentially going too far. They're not. If anything, I could get behind a cheaper college or a cheaper healthcare movement, but that's just not what we're seeing. We're seeing them trying to, essentially approach it through paying it for taxes, so that for certain people, they would get it at no cost. And I think this has been economically, disastrous in a lot of cases. Like you're saying, it ends up increasing the price actually and creating a higher burden, all around. Basically, let me take this to the example of income inequality. Then, we can talk. I think this would be an ideal place to discuss that. So essentially, I know that you've written multiple books tackling the history of these issues, from the 1700s all the way to the present day. And as you know, income inequality is a very thorny issue. Its cause is often blamed on corporate greed or some inherent flaw in capitalism itself. The problem I see with this line of thinking is, for one, it ignores the increase in income and standard of living on the other portions of society. And it also overlooks the role that government actually plays, through these, statist policies that have worsened the situation anyway, that have propped up, income inequality.
Mm-hmm.
So, in that case, what do you attribute in that case to income inequality? What do you attribute this increase to it?
So, in fact, I actually wrote a book into 2 volumes called A History of Wealth Distribution in the United States. I don't know if you saw it, but
Oh yes, that's what I was referring to.
okay, yeah, it's a massive book that I wrote, and so what actually engineered wealth inequality in America is government policy and the way government has structured capitalism. Before 1971, and the reason why this date is such an important date is for anyone who knows economics know that 1971 completely changed the entire economic prospect of this country and why things are expensive today. Before 1971, inequality has already existed in the United States, but the inequality we had was a fair inequality. You know, people first of all mix inequality with unfairness. They think that because something is not equal, therefore it is unfair. That's wrong. You for example, let's say you have a sibling that is good at other things that you're not good at. You guys are unequal. Does it mean that it's unfair? No. I think it's actually complementary. Suppose you and your brother, for example, let me assume that you have a brother if you do have one.
Oh, yes.
let us assume that you guys want to start a engineering consulting firm. And let's say that your brother is the one that actually studied engineering. You didn't. But you're good at marketing. Therefore, he brings you in, right? He's good at the calculus of, calculating whatever it needs to be done. And you're good at promoting the business. Are you guys equal? No, but you guys are complementary. You guys are bringing your strength together to create something that will improve your welfare and the welfare of your clients. That's what capitalism is. Capitalism is unequal, but it is fair. Why it is fair? Because the equality that capitalism creates is based on how every economic agent allocates its resources. That's what it is. If you allocate your resources efficiently, you will have a optimal outcome than someone who did not allocate his resources efficiently. Simple as that. But then 1971 happened. Richard Nixon took the United States off the gold standard.
Yep, that's right.
Before 1971, Americans did not even have to invest in the stock market because the dollar was not losing its value. The dollar was backed by gold. So there was no need for you to put your money into assets. If you did it, it was a bonus. But it was not a need to make sure that you financially survive. Today, you're compelled to invest if you want to financially survive, because if you keep your money in your savings account, that money is losing value because now the economy is based on debt. And debt is based by what gives debt value is that it is based on the real value of future resources. So basically, you're borrowing against future prosperity. That's what debt is. And that's dangerous because it slows your growth. It slows what you could have accomplished. Today, the United States has a GDP of $25 trillion. And it has a national debt of $34 trillion. So we are over leveraged. We have more liability than assets. And that's bad. Because that debt we are accumulating, we have to pay it off. Economists say, oh no, we don't have to pay off the debt. We don't have to work because we owe it to ourselves. No, that's not true. Our kids, our grandkids are the one paying it off. Today, what's the point to even start a 429 plan if college is going to move from 50K to 100K because of the national debt? That's a problem. So we may not pay it off, but our kids are the ones that are paying off that debt through the increase of the cost of living. That's where the deal is. And the credit system that we have perpetrate that. It actually encourage that. Because money is debt. I always tell people, when you check your bank account in your phone, whatever amount you see is not real money. It's called scriptural money. It's debt that will be reimbursed to you on demand. It's money that the bank owes you. Fractional reserve banking. You know about this. You are in the libertarian movement. And that even the fractional reserve banking also contributes to income inequality. Why? Because the bank is more lenient toward wealthy people. If you're poor and you don't even have enough money in your bank will charge you overdraft fees.
Exactly, yes.
Right? But if you're rich, the bank will give you favorable terms if you want a loan. And if you're poor, the bank will give you harsher terms. It's going to give you like 20 or 30% interest rate because the bank want to make sure they're making money on interest income. That's how they make their money. So it actually increased income inequality. And now the overall macroeconomy with the Federal Reserve printing money. And that creates the cantillon effect. Rich people are getting richer because they're the first recipient of that new money created. When they receive it, the price of goods and assets and services has not increased yet. By the time the working class receives that money, everything's on the roof. And they get poorer. Before 1971, the gold standard prevented those things from happening. That's why the middle class was so strong in America back then. Back then, all you had to do was to go to college, get a good job, and that's it, and then buy a home. That was the American dream. The gold standard enabled people to have a middle class, to have a peaceful life. You go to college to increase your chances of having a very good job. Once you get your degree, you get hired by whatever firm or company you apply to where they believe in you. You get you have a good income, you buy a house. Today, wages cannot keep up with prices because of inflation. And who creates inflation? Inflation is always created by government because only government has the power to print money. Only government has the power to print money. No other institution has the power to print money. The government has the power to print money through the central bank. The central bank is, people love to say, oh yeah, the central bank is independent. No, the central bank is a branch of government. Okay? It's a branch of government. It's just that it is structured as a joint stock company where it has shareholders and stuff like that. But the central bank is the real treasury of the government. The government needs funds for whatever project. The central bank will print the money by buying government bonds and then provides government the liquidity it needs to meet its obligations.
Yes.
That's what it is. And the worst part is that because all these laws government does is to help, right? Help the working class and the middle class, but they're the ones who are ripped off. Because the cantillon effect does not benefit them. It benefits rich people.
Right. And this is something I often do here. I think that there's a perversion of that where people will define the current economic system in America as socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. And then but then the problem is that they eventually take that aside and then conclude that from that we should have socialism for the poor. And, in that case, I think, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. But basically, I've noticed that, as somebody who favors the Austrian school, I know I'm in the minority, but I am somebody who advocates a return to the gold standard. As unrealistic as that may be in the modern, 21st century society, that is what I would personally like to see happen. But, another thing I've noticed too is just the outrageous instability of, fiat currency, and like you're talking about with investments, for example, I see the crypto market, and I see that as something where that's very different from investment many decades ago, where it seems to me that investment in cryptocurrency is almost investment motivated by fear, essentially. Fear of, your dollar losing its value and simply, being left behind in terms of that financially, being robbed of what you have in terms of assets and value. So there's something, I just see that in itself as a very serious indictment against the current monetary situation in terms of, what's going on. But as I was saying, since I advocate, the gold standard, what is your particular remedy towards, correcting this current situation? I don't know if that's something you advocate or if you have something, a bit
I
different in
mean,
mind.
I'm pretty much on the same line as you. It's advocating for the gold standard. That's number one. And number two, supply side policies. Because at the end of the day, if there was no gold standard, but government implements supply side policies instead of demand side policies, that would have at least mitigated the effect, right? Because we are still propping up supply, so that's good. We have more goods and services in the market. Therefore, economic growth is more natural, more genuine. But on top of not having the gold standard, we're putting money in people's hands to spend. And because the credit market, the credit system is inherently inflationary. So if it's inherently inflationary and you know that inflation is already a problem, then stimulate supply, don't stimulate demand. But government does the opposite. It always stimulates demand because stimulating demand means giving people access to credit at low interest rates, meaning the government increases its assets on the balance sheet. Government does things for itself. That's all. Government always does things for itself. It doesn't do it for anybody else. When government say, "Oh yeah, we're lowering interest rate to 2%. You can buy a home at 2% interest rate. You can take a car loan at 1% interest rate. You can do this at X interest rates." People are happy, but the government is happier because the government increases assets and you incurring debt.
Right.
And the
They
day you
incentivize
cannot pay, that goes to the collection agency, and government and banks will never give you money again, and you're screwed.
Right. Like you're saying, going off of that example, they will incentivize people to buy houses, but they won't necessarily incentivize people to build them or produce them, in greater quantity.
Yeah.
And I mean, in reality, that's what it really comes down to. I mean, the best way to stimulate, supply is through actual production, which the government, as an institution, does not actually produce anything to begin with.
Exactly.
And I think
so it's basically to remedy the entire system is first to bring back the gold standard, to have a full reserve banking system, 100% full reserve banking system rather than fractional reserve banking system, and stimulating supply instead of demand. And as I said, right, during this interview, I was not 100% Austrian, but if I gotta say this, I have no problem admitting when I was wrong or anything. If there is one thing where the Austrians are correct in terms of economics, is monetary policy. Austrians are 100% correct. Like, I would rather rely on the Austrian approach to economics when it comes to monetary policy than any other school of thought. Because the Austrians are more consistent with their explanation on the business cycle and how the economy works. And it's true, especially that we live in a credit-based system. The Austrian business cycle is definitely consistent with what's going on. As I said, maybe in terms of methodology, praxeology, and stuff like that I disagree with the Austrians. But when it comes to monetary policy and value, whether value is subjective or objective, or based on labor, stuff like that. On these two, the Austrians are correct. Absolutely, they are correct. And government is the source of wealth inequality in America, and not just in America, in everywhere, because they're the ones that have power over the money. Money, unfortunately, is not neutral. When you inject money in the economy, it affects everything. Money is not neutral. So people can say, oh, money is neutral. It doesn't matter how much money we put in the economy. No, it matters. That's what MMT doesn't make sense. You see, when I mentioned earlier about people tend to believe things because they're logical, right? MMT, for example.
Yeah, that's a classic example.
Right? MMT, when you follow the logic, it makes sense. It makes sense. However, empirically speaking, MMT has been applied in Latin American and African countries, in emerging countries. And MMT has produced suboptimal results. It's technically socialism. But it's socialism from a pure economic standpoint, giving government the full power over money and stuff like that. There is this German economist, it was George Friedrich Knapp. He wrote a book called The State Theory of Money. And basically, that is the foundation of modern monetary policy. Basically, he argues that money has value because it is a creature of law, based on the fact that it is legal tender. Money doesn't have value because it's a commodity. That's why he explains. Right? Someone who reads that at first, you'll be like, oh yeah, that's true, because the logic is there. But let's look at the evidence. Empirically, it doesn't make sense. And MMT supports all these policies that, government can print endlessly, government should use government spending to fuel the economy. But we know what government spending does. And it produces suboptimal results. Yeah,
right.
Sorry, what did you say?
Also, in the case of MMT, what you're saying basically is that although the logic may flow, from premise to premise, it's that the premises themselves are not correct to begin with. And that's essentially what is causing, the suboptimal results in the cases where it's being applied.
Exactly. Yeah, because when they say government can print as much as it wants to meet whatever economic objective it has, well, there are consequences. It's not the intention that matters. You see, the thing with economics is that people don't understand that economics is a consequential discipline. Economics is not that's why we say economics is a positive science, because economics doesn't deal with intentions or it's morally right to do so. No one cares that economics doesn't care that it's morally right. If you print too much money, you're going to have hyperinflation and you're going to destroy the purchasing power of people. That's a fact. Whether it's morally right or wrong, it doesn't matter. If you prop up demand, it's going to increase the cost of things. That's a fact. Action, consequences. Economics is consequentialist. It is not deterministic. That's the thing to understand. If you prop up demand, you're going to have inflation. If you prop up supply, you're going to have deflation. Action, reaction. Simple as that. Economics doesn't care about the intent. Whether it's nice, oh yeah, let's prop up demand because it's nice, it will help people. No. It's not a matter of the fact that it will help people. You print money, you try to prop up demand, it's going to create unintended consequences in the economy. Simple as that.
Yes. So I do think we've, discussed, a pretty thorough line from, the situation in Africa to, what Black Americans are being faced with, as well as the, the hard economics that are, applicable in today's current society. So to wrap things up, I kind of just wanted to ask you, globally, what do you think is the biggest fallacy present in economic reasoning, and why do you think this is the case?
The biggest fallacy is that we need government to do things.
I can certainly agree to that.
That's literally the biggest, because that's what Keynesian economics or demand-side economics is all about. We need government to intervene to improve things. Although government intervention makes things worse because it does economics the wrong way. It taps on demand instead of tapping on supply. Even if it taps on supply, it will be artificially. It will try to control forces. Market forces are things you don't control. They're natural. Market forces are set by consumers and producers. How markets are created. This is how markets are created. You observe society, you realize that there is a need for something. And people may not know that there's a need. That's the key part here. People may not know there is a need, but you realize that there is a need. So you decide to create a prototype. The prototype is the good or service that you use as pilot. You create a prototype and you put that prototype in the market to see how consumers are going to react to that prototype. If they like the prototype, then this is what we call in the startup world, you're gaining traction. You have to show that there's traction. As they like the prototype, now demand start to increase. As demand increase, now you turn that prototype into the official good and service that you are supplying to the market. Supply creates its own demand. You need to have a product first that you put in the market so that demand will either follow because they like what you're supplying the market, or demand doesn't follow, they don't like what you're offering them. But you cannot prop up demand. You cannot simply demand something into existence, as Jean-Baptiste would say, says law of markets. You can't just prop up demand if there's no product. You cannot demand something to existence. Something has to exist first. Then you create the demand for that thing that exists. For example, let me use Steve Jobs again with the iPhone. People did not realize that they need an iPhone. Steve Jobs saw a need. When he made his conference, he said, we created something where you have a phone, and I forgot, like it's like a very famous video. He said, like, you have all these, like a phone, an iPod, and a keyboard, all of that in one object. When he created that, people did not realize they need an iPhone. But he saw the need. He created the product, the prototype. He first created a product to see how people will react to it. He saw that demand increase. Now that became a good and a service at the same time. And now everyone buys iPhone. He created a market. That's how markets are created. Goods and services are to be created, and then demand increase based on that good and services existing. But you don't try to prop up demand for things that don't exist at all. You don't demand things into the existence. And that's the real issue with government here. Government tries to prop up demand while supply doesn't follow. And this is to answer your question, that's what the issue is that we think that, I think like the issue is that human beings don't trust themselves. They feel like they need a higher authority to guide them, to tell them, no, you need to do this, you cannot do that. That's why. They don't trust themselves enough to allocate the resources efficiently. I can ask you this, Evan, like, do you think government can manage your podcast better than you?
Absolutely not. No.
Right? If you ask any person, do you think the government can manage whatever you have better than you do? Any rational person will tell you no. Then why do you want government to manage the economy? It doesn't make sense. So that's what it is. It's just people lack of self-trust, people believing that without government, nothing can be done. That's what the real problem is that belief.
Yes, I see it as something that's fundamentally almost an appeal to ignorance, really. Yeah. Something where they're so uncertain about it, and in an attempt to, satisfy, their own ignorance, they'll throw out some complete non sequitur, which is the government. which does not arise necessarily from the conclusions they're putting forth for it. So the government arises as something that does not fit the actual problem that they're posing that's posed in the first place.
Yeah.
But basically, from what you're saying there, I do see that as something that very astutely lays out the fundamental problem of government in our society. And I do thank you for that, and I do thank you for coming on to the show today.
Thank you.
So thanks for coming on. And with that said, I want to thank everybody out there for tuning in. This has been Morgan Meets the Eye. Make sure to, read Germinal's books. Make sure to check those out on Amazon. And make sure to subscribe, comment, and above all, keep asking why. So everybody out there, have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you.